Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Michael Freeston, Director of Quality Improvement at the Early Years Alliance, and I'm joined this afternoon by Beatrice Merrick, Chief Executive of Early Education.
Good afternoon.
You're joining us this afternoon 11 days before the closing of the DfE's consultation into the Early Years Foundation stage reforms. So we thought it would be a timely opportunity to consider the reforms and to provide an opportunity for questions and comments from the sector to hopefully inform their responses. So the way we're going to structure today is very much the notion of a question and answer session. Beatrice and I will spend a few minutes talking through the consultation, the technical aspects, but also sharing some of the comments, considerations that have been raised with us during the consultation process and the activities that led up to it. But this is very much your opportunity to ask questions of us, to make any comments, and hopefully we can answer the questions, but it is all geared towards informing your responses to the consultation. Hopefully you can all see my slides, and hopefully when I click this button they're going to work. So, by way of summary, the aims of the session are to give an overview of the consultation and the process for responding, to consider the aspects of the current review of the Early Years Foundation stage, to provide an opportunity for you to make any comments and questions of us, and again, hopefully we'll be able to answer some of them, and to inform your responses to the consultation. Okay, just a few minutes for the technical details. The EYFS Reforms is a consultation seeking views from, and the quote from the DfE is, anybody with an interest in early years education and assessment on its proposed changes to the EYFS framework. The government says that the changes will improve outcomes for all children, but particularly the language and literacy outcomes for disadvantaged children and reduce teacher workload. The consultation opened on the 24th of October and will close, do we have a time on the 31st of January? 11 p.m. I've got in my head for some reason. Sometime on the 31st, but don't leave it till the last day. What's covered? The consultation covers proposed revisions to the educational programmes, the narrative which in the current Early Years Foundation stage provides an overview of how provision takes place in the early years. The proposed revisions to the early learning goals, the 17 expectations for children by the time they reach 5. The proposed changes to the assessment and moderation processes for the Early Years Foundation stage profile, and a proposed change to the safeguarding and welfare requirements to promote good oral health. So it's quite a broad spread in terms of the EYFS review, but I think it's safe to say, and when we come to Beatrice, she'll give an overview of this, most of the attention has focused on the revisions to the educational programmes and the revisions to the early learning goals. Right, what the proposals are intended to do. Make all 17 early learning goals clearer, more specific and easier for teachers to make accurate judgments. Focus on strengthening language and vocabulary development to particularly support disadvantaged children. Strengthen literacy and numeracy outcomes to ensure all children have a good grasp of these areas of learning in preparation for Year 1. And ensure the early learning goals are based on the latest evidence in childhood development and ensure they reflect the strongest predictors of future attainment. What we decided not to do today is to walk through a line-by-line assessment or consideration of all of the proposals, because A, it would be too long, and B, this is really very much us trying to inform your responses rather than tell you ours. However, I have included the links to various organisations who are drafting responses and submitting them. We will make these slides available to everybody who has registered for today's event, and what I should have said at the beginning was this webinar is being recorded and will be available on the Early Years Alliances and Early Education's websites, hopefully by tomorrow morning, if we can get all the technical aspects sorted out. So just a selected number of responses or URLs we've got there. There's the one from Tactic, there's Beatrice's from Early Education, and there's ours following those links. But again, these are there as the views of these organisations. They may help inform your responses, and hopefully will give balanced responses to where we think improvements could be made or comments arising from what we've read. What I think I'll hand over to Beatrice to focus on is the work of a coalition of early years organisations that has been progressing alongside from the initial draft of the first early years foundation stage response all the way up to the consultation. And so I hand over now and I just end up pressing the buttons.
Thank you, Michael. So, hopefully everybody can hear. Maybe the builders have just
started drilling. I am sorry, Beatrice. I primed them.
Absolutely. So, we felt very much that the way to strengthen the sector's engagement with government on this was to get together and to present as unified a response as possible. So, what we are trying to do, and what the DFE sort of responded to our coalition by I think sort of working a bit more explicitly with us and inviting us to keep feeding back to them, keep meeting with them. So our aim as the coalition was to be supportive to government, not just to be the awkward squad, and to try and make sure that the evidence base was there. And I think there was a very strong feeling that the TKEL review had been a real model of how to do this well in terms of building the evidence base and engaging with the sector, and that was very much the model that we took, that we wanted government to be engaging not just with the research but with the practitioner knowledge base that we know that you have, that is enormous. So a large number of early years membership organisations came together and we did two things. Firstly, we commissioned a literature review, which you can see a lovely screenshot of here with lots of logos on. Getting it right in the early years foundation stage, a review of the evidence, and that's available for download on our website, and gives a fantastic overview of the evidence from the last 10 years about the state of the research and what it shows. And I think the next slide gives you a link to that as well.
It does.
And
well done.
the other thing that we've done is we did a survey, which many of you may have responded to. We had 3,000 responses to that. I'm hoping the government are going to get even more in response to their consultation. Our survey was only open for about 3 weeks, and we had 3,000 responses from the sector, and the headlines from that are available, and the full report of the survey will be available, I hope, in the next week or so, but that will just add the sort of detailed weight behind what people were saying. So the literature review gave us really clear messages that nothing significant has changed in the evidence base regarding okay, sorry, I gather that some of you are struggling to hear. I'm coming a bit closer to the microphone.
Is that better? If I turn that volume up as well.
Is that getting better?
We're getting some yeses back in there, so okay.
Okay, so hopefully that's better. I'll move my chair a bit closer. So the literature review was showing us that the evidence that informed the TKEL review is still very much supported. The characteristics of effective teaching and learning are still strongly upheld by the research about the importance of self-regulation and executive function. And I guess we can say one of the good things about the current consultation is that it's not proposing any changes to the characteristics. Those will remain statutory. The research also supports the current structure, emphasising the importance of the prime areas, particularly in the earliest years, and that relationship between the primary specific areas. It supports the premise that everything is interconnected, all the areas of learning are interconnected, and the holistic nature of children's development. And it does confirm the importance of communication and language skills as a basis for later literacy, which is certainly in tune with what government is saying. But it also notes there is no particular evidence to support giving maths and literacy greater emphasis than any other area of learning. So, yes, you know, we're all in agreement. Communication and language matters. Literacy helps children access the curriculum in primary and beyond, but pushing it all back earlier and focusing it on some areas at the expense of others is not the way forward. And obviously there's a lot more in the literature review. It's about 80 pages, but that's some highlights.
Just a comment, notwithstanding the consultation exercise, as a piece of literature on its own merit, in terms of for any students or for anybody to get a good overview of recent developments in research around children's learning development and neuroscience, it is a fantastic read. I would recommend it to anybody from a purely understanding of early years children's early learning and development as much as anything else.
Absolutely. So turning to the practitioner survey, practitioners had some really clear messages which may not come as a surprise to any of you. They said changing the EYFS is not the issue. Yes, there is a concern, and actually we hadn't asked specifically about workload. This was an emerging finding that people were having issues with paperwork, but also about a real lack of time to work with outside professionals, with those speech and language therapists and others that are a crucial part of the landscape, and that the key thing there was about time, was about resource, was about access to these other professionals, but it wasn't about a need to change the EYFS per se. The support for the EYF was really strong, particularly around the prime areas. I think probably some of the areas where there was slightly less support were perhaps around understanding the world, but there's not a great demand coming from the sector that we saw for changing the current system. So we thought it would be helpful to sort of at least sort of flag, as Michael said, we're not going to go through line by line what's right or wrong with the proposed changes, but we thought we'd give you a few headlines of the things that we're seeing, you'll see raised in the responses that we flagged and that people are raising with us. So physical development, there has been some positive comments about having gross motor skills and fine motor skills as separate ELGs, about this being clearer, but there's also concern that actually it then excludes other areas of physical development such as proprioception, vestibular development, which are all vital for the sort of cognitive and physical development and the interrelated nature of those. And also concern about moving self-care from physical development to PSED, and particularly around the risk that may mean some children with disabilities who would currently be able to achieve the PSED early learning goal now wouldn't be able to. So we think that's, there are certainly areas there. Turning to PSED, I think we see a lot of concerns that that's a bit muddled, particularly the new ELG on self-regulation. I think there's a huge sense that government's kind of half got the message from the sector that self-regulation is really important, but trying to introduce a self-regulation ELG, they've had a few goes at it now, and the latest version is not quite as bad as the previous version in that it's not just focused on children sitting still and behaving, but it is still a little bit too much on that side, not recognising how this relates to the characteristics and the executive function as cognitive rather than just emotional self-regulation. So concerns there. Communication and language, we're hearing a lot of concern, particularly around the removal of understanding, the understanding ELG, which should be so foundational to children's development. What government has done has been to take out understanding from communication and language and put something called comprehension and literacy, which actually, although the way they've written it, it's still about oral understanding, not about written understanding. So it's all a bit confused. And if they're saying that communication and language is important, why reduce from 3 to 2 ELGs and increase literacy from 2 to 3, which, as we know at the moment, literacy is one of the areas where children are least likely to achieve the ELG. It's arguably set too high, it's unrealistic, and that has an impact on those children who don't achieve the so-called good level of development. So literacy, I think, a lot of concern, and we saw this also in the government's own evaluation, the ones undertaken by NAPSEN and EEF, where there was certainly no consensus on the proposal to include those 10 digraphs in a sound for every letter. That's certainly contentious, and we're hearing a lot of concern that the requirements as they've been set are just going to reduce the number of children who can achieve that ELG. So maths, I think this has been one of the things that's caused most heat and light in the sector. The removal of shape, space and measure, no one can
well
say.
done, yes.
And also the focus exclusively on number. So rather than looking at pattern in its broadest sense, an ELG just on numerical patterns. So far too narrowly focused on number, not on all the other aspects of maths which are important to children's development. Understanding the world has been really schoolified, if I can put it that way. Suddenly it's history, geography and science masquerading under other names instead of the existing ELGs. It's far too theoretical, it's about learning from books, not learning from children's direct experience. There are some concerns that by taking technology out, I think probably the technology ELG was not thought to be ideal, but taking it out altogether rather than reforming it is a missed opportunity, because we know that STEM is a really important aspect, and why in the world of 21st century skills in the 5th industrial revolution are we taking that out? Real concerns around expressive art and design, although we did manage to get a little bit less of a focus on performance, it's still very much about children as passive consumers of cultural artifacts, and not about exploration and creativity, which is the current focus. Then turning to the educational programmes, I think just overall we feel that the drafting of them has sort of lost the stated aim that they should be a statement of the activities that children should have. It's not reflective of the birth to 5 age range. And to be fair, I think that may be in part because DFE had sort of rewritten them as preambles to the ELGs. We talked to them about this, they took them back into being a single section but without reframing them. So I think they will probably be looking at doing some more work on those. I would hope, having recognised that they were serving a little bit of a different purpose to what they'd been proposing at an earlier stage of the drafting.
Okay, just before we hand it over, thank you, Beatrice. Just one comment, an omission on my part, I do apologise. In the list of URLs that I should have included around what may inform your responses, the obvious one which I forgot to put on is that the DFE did a webinar on Thursday afternoon presenting the rationale and outlining the proposed changes to the earliest foundation stage, and that is now available on the DFE's website. So you can download and listen for the justifications and the explanations. And the reason it came into my mind there was quite a long session in terms of the shape, space and measure statement that that whilst that's not an early learning goal, reference to it has been moved into the educational programs from an earlier draft side. So there are, when you are coming to constructing your own responses, it is important to look in the process in the round, but also to make your comments about whether something should be a specific early learning goal, because DFE may well say, well, it's still in there. The fact that its status has changed is something that you may wish to draw attention to. Right, from our point of view, that's what we've said. Now we are very much at your, what's the word, beck and call. Over to you. Any questions or comments from anything, either about what we've said or any areas that you may wish to have clarified in terms of the consultation process, or any questions you may want to run past us that you may be thinking about in terms of your response. We've got all of our information here in terms of the technical documents, but we have been sort of rather biting our fingernails, wondering what on earth may come from the participants. So be gentle with
us. Just while we're waiting for people to type, if you go to the other consultation response that's well worth a look is the one from the Early Childhood Maths group, and again that's linked from our webpage that's in the presentation if anyone wants to find their way to that.
Okay, silence is always a difficult thing with both radio and webinars. So for those of you who know me for a long time, this is where I waffle on inanely until something comes up. Tariq, all this well and good. However, the major is the support that would be provided in implementing this. I think, Tariq, thank you. A major concern is the support that would be provided implementing this. It's an interesting point. If you listen to the DFE's webinar and in any of the conferences they present at, the phrase is the early learning goals are not the curriculum. So there is an issue that the early learning goals are only an assessment point at the end of the foundation stage. The important point in terms of freeing up teachers and practitioners to spend more time with children, that issue of what they're doing with that time to make sure we're effectively supporting children's learning and development as best as possible. There is a parallel review of the Development Matters document being undertaken, being led by Dr. Julian Grenier, where they're saying that those issues about how children are supported will be covered in the Development Matters documentation. So in terms of support for the sector to engage effectively with the EYFS reforms is there will be additional curriculum advice, and the early learning goals don't determine what practitioners do with children. You may want to reflect on that as you're writing your consultation. Sharon, my only comment would be that removing the understanding element of communication and language ELG will not be good for giving an accurate assessment of our EAL children. Beatrice, reference to EAL and special educational needs, etc.
Yes, I think that, and interestingly, again, this was an area where the evaluation of the pilot certainly came up with both positives and negatives. Some things were thought to be better for EAL children and others worse. And I think that that's a really important area to flag in responses because, yes, I think that depending on where they go with the final version, the quite subtle differences are very important. Somebody had also raised the issue of children who use, I'm going to use the wrong phrase here, alternative communication systems, augmented communication systems. Hopefully you know what I mean, even if the wrong phrases come to mind. Cannot meet the ELGs as currently drafted. So again, I think there are a range of issues around whether children with SEND can meet the revised ELGs, which would be really helpful for the sector to flag.
I'm just looking at my printed copy of the consultation document, and question 14 is the standard question that goes on any DFE consultation or I think any government consultation in terms of the question on equalities assessment. There is a requirement within any consultation to give due consideration to how any particular proposals will impact on those with protected characteristics or any other additional needs. So if you're thinking about where in the consultation document you may want to make reference to the particular circumstances that children with additional needs may have, you may want to try and weave it into question 14. But you can thread it through the document as you see fit. Just a word about how the consultation is constructed. Apart from the initial questions in terms of who you are, etc., when it gets to the meat of the questions, you are invited to make a comment about all of the educational programs, or none, or one, etc., within an open text box. Similarly with the early learning goals. So when you get to read the draft consultations from organisations, they are lengthy. This is going to be a real technical challenge for those charged with reading and assessing the consultation documents, because people, and I'm sure what we found from the practitioner survey, people took the opportunity to really state their views on a number of issues around the early years foundation stage, and so it can be something which becomes quite lengthy. You'll see that when you come to filling in your responses. Question from Di: what is the general feeling from the non-maintained sector about the reforms? They have been so marginalised by the process and the DFE. Their voices need to be heard. Very worried for the sector. There is a view that has been expressed to me, Beatrice, if you don't mind, I'll respond first on this one, from the PBI sector, in as much that, in many cases, why are you concerned, Michael? Because this is only really a review of the early learning goals, which is done by teachers when children are in receptions. It has no relevance to your constituency, my constituency being childminders, preschools, nurseries. I would disagree with that point of view in terms of, if you change the ultimate product of anything, then by definition you change the process down through all its constituent parts. The earliest foundation stage is from 0 to 5. We're not talking just about something which is the very top of the pyramid, for want of a better phrase. It will have implications all the way down through the sector. On a related matter, I'm not sure if you saw the comments in this week's TES about Phil Minns, Ofsted's early years specialist, making a presentation at a conference last week saying Ofsted do not expect to see phonics being taught in PBI non-maintained settings. They feel as though it's something which should not be begun until reception or year 1. Reception, I think, sorry to quote him correctly. So I think that's an indication of the fact that whatever the expectation is at the EYFSP end, it does impact on what practitioners do throughout the entire sector. So I share your concerns, Di, in terms of this will change how practitioners, what they understand their expectations to be, because it's presented in the early years foundation stage. Beatrice, anything?
Yeah, and I'd add that if the educational programmes are the closest there is in statutory form to a statement of the curriculum. So although there's an opportunity to comment on those and they may feel very brief and you think, oh, well, that's not crucial, there is no obligation on government to consult on its rewrite of development matters, which is a non-statutory document. So what goes in those educational programmes, so for example, whether or not shape, space and measure is in there or not, is crucial. But as Michael said, we know that what gets taught is driven by what gets assessed. So I think that that's where it all hangs together, and we do need to be really concerned about the whole thing and making sure that nothing is inadvertently changed, because I do think that it reads at times as though DFE are very focused on that reception year and need a lot of reminding about, well, how does that apply to babies? How does that apply to 2-year-olds? And that's what we're constantly trying to do, and say, you know, at least particularly with the educational programs. That's got to have that whole age range in mind.
Thank you. Any more comments, questions? What I'm not able to see on this system is whether people are actually typing at any time while I'm talking. No, sorry, yes. Where's the, oh, I've just got this out of order and I've lost it now. Apart from the comment that Beatrice is quite right, she always is, I have to say. Sorry, I've lost my system. My only comment would be, no, that's, have we covered that one? Sorry, that's one. Right, I've got them back in order now. Just waiting for a few seconds to see if there is anybody else who has something they're burning to raise. But for those of you who have attended, if that's the right word, Alliance webinars in the past, you'll know that we don't artificially extend them. Once questions and comments have dried up, we draw them to a natural close. And in which case I sort of enter a period of about 30 seconds of inane waffle while I give people a final opportunity to make any questions they want to. Otherwise, we will draw to a close. And if that's the situation, my final 20 or 30 seconds on this, apart from thanking Beatrice for her time to join me today to walk us through this process, is I can't stress strongly enough how important it is to encourage everybody to respond to this consultation. DFE, to their credit, read them all. There is a process of allocating responses to across the department, and they are all read and contribute to the outcomes from which DFE present the final document. Just one thing, and this is not a slide because we were just trying to get our heads around the timeline before we finish. DFE, for legal reasons, the custom and practice is that any final document has to be given to schools an academic year in advance before formally being introduced. So DFE are working on the timeline that the final EYFS will become a requirement from September 2021. Beatrice is nodding at me. However, they are inviting schools to take on, in a voluntary way, the final proposal from this September. So it raises the question about the timeline for formal response to submissions to the consultation and the final drafting of the new EYFS and any supporting material, taking Tariq's question earlier on, in terms of how it may be implemented, any training, any support. So there are some questions about quite a tight time frame for bringing forward what will be the new early years foundation stage. And with that, as nobody else has made any questions, it just remains for me to say thank you to all of you who have participated. As I said, we will circulate copies of the slide to everybody who was registered. The recording will be available hopefully from tomorrow morning on the Early Years Alliance website and Early Education's. And my thanks to Beatrice for joining me this afternoon, and to say thank you to you all.